Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's very nice to have such a distinguished audience to discuss one of the important issues of the future in the Arctic. And we just heard Vivian Motzfeldt give us her message, and the key message actually that she gave was what we have heard in recent years at these assemblies, that Greenland is open for business. And here we have three distinguished panelists that are going to talk about what is really needed, investment partnerships. We have Caroline Cochrane, who's not only the Premier of the Northwest Territories, but also comes from a long line of mining. I think she has a mining background somehow. We have also Hugh. He has practical experience. He has invested in Alaska, in Iceland, and one of the questions I'm going to ask this guy is, why hasn't he invested in Greenland and the Northwest Territories as well? So prepare yourself. But first and foremost, I want to address Scott Miner. Scott is a veteran of this new thinking about partnerships for investment in the Arctic. And I have to tell you, from afar, I have admired this guy all the time since I heard him start talking about the Arctic Investment Protocol, because he realizes that you cannot just race into the Arctic with money, you have to have ethical principle. And this guy has ethics in the right place. But Scott as well, he is a guy that knows his money as well. He works for Guggenheim Partners, one of the most prestigious capital companies in the world. He was the initiator of the Arctic Investment Register that was begotten within this assembly some years ago. They have actually accumulated 8,000 ideas for investment that now are kept as an open source register with the Wilson Center in DC. And I want to start with you, Scott. How do you see us proceed from now? You and I and President Grimsson have been talking about this for some years, but isn't it time for action?
Össur, I couldn't agree more. I think it is time for action. This is the 10th assembly, I believe, and we were talking about this at the first assembly. And one of the things that motivated me to be involved in developing the Arctic Investment Protocol was the number of issues that I ran into in relationship to economic development in the Arctic. And that was, there are a lot of interests in the Arctic. And when we developed the protocol, we worked with approximately 40 stakeholders in the Arctic, which ranged from Greenpeace to indigenous peoples to Shell Oil. And you can imagine having all those people work. It took us 2 years to develop these 6 guiding principles on economic development. And to answer the question, it seemed premature to try to move forward when there was no real consensus about how to do this in a big way. Then, of course, you referred to the Arctic Inventory, which is at the Wilson Center. And one of the questions I ran into when I talked to major investors is, well, what are the investment opportunities in the Arctic? And I've traveled around the Arctic a lot and met with people, and met with Hugh, and I would go to places and they would say to me, we'd like to build a port here in our city. And that was like, great, what's the revenue realization plan? And it was sort of like, well, if we build it, they will come, right? And that doesn't go down in the capital markets real well, which I'm sure you can fill us in on. And so it was very difficult to attract capital because we couldn't be specific. So now we're at the point where we've I think developed a good track record. We were involved with Hugh's efforts to raise the first Arctic investment fund, and his returns have been very attractive. As an investor, I just grilled him before we walked into the room to find out the latest. And very attractive returns that institutional investors will like. So the next step for us is to move forward and to begin the process of developing what I believe is the best approach, which is to develop a permanent capital vehicle which will be made available to sovereign wealth funds, institutions around the world that can give us meaningful amounts of capital, and to find partners like Hugh and people in Greenland and elsewhere throughout the Arctic to begin deploying this.
No, sorry, Scott, if I might just interrupt you. I mean,
sure.
Because we should try to be as concrete as possible in this discussion.
Right.
Because you are the guy who taught me that the world doesn't need more think tanks, it needs do tanks. and what I know of you is that you are a doer. When you say that this is what we, and you use the word we need,
right.
And I totally agree with you, we need a financial vehicle. But you taught me a new word last night, capital aggregator. He describes himself as a capital aggregator. So, I mean, what we really need is someone to take the plunge. Will that be you?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Give him a hand.
I'm going to be dragging a lot of people along with me, including you and President Grimsson and Össur. You'll be traveling on the road with me for 14 weeks.
I'm all yours. But I would like to move to the Madam Premier, which has a long history, both in politics and also in mining. And I want to ask her what type of investments are needed, for example, in the Northwest Territories, and on what premises do you accept capital? I mean, we know that there's a lot of people that want to race for resources in the Arctic with increased melting, but I mean, people like you have been instrumental in laying down rules, ethical rules about sustainability. But tell us about your experience.
Absolutely. I think I'll start with the differences. Like was said, I have a long history in mining. My father moved to the Northwest Territories in 1961. I was 1 year old, and he was a diamond driller, and he had a diamond drilling company. Back in the day, it was all about what you could extract from the earth and extract from the people. It was all about money. And I know that history because he had many children, and if you were a girl, you worked in the office, and if you were a boy, you were in the field. That's kind of how he raised us. So my father, loved him dearly. He's passed now, but back in the day, in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, I mean, it was about taking from the earth, and so he would extract, and they would leave. It was more expensive to take the equipment out of the mine sites, the exploration sites, than it was to take them out or to move them. So they would dig big holes, and they would bury equipment and oil drums, and very bad for our environment, things that we're looking at fixing today. We're still dealing with those days. But my brother carried on the family tradition, and he's still in the business, and he has a larger diamond drilling company in the Northwest Territories, and things are different. Now they no longer allow you to leave the waste in the sites. You have to make sure that you have the ESG components, that you're giving back to people, and that you're cleaning up so the remediation isn't as bad. We have a lot to offer. So we have major companies in the Northwest Territories. We have companies that some of you might be familiar with, Diavik, Caddy, Rio Tinto, no one from South Africa. And when they first came into the territories, I was fearful because we know histories in Africa, and I always believe learn from your lessons. But again, things are different, and they focused on diamonds. And we started the Northwest Territories, the major mining was gold. and then diamonds were found, and we ate a lot.
Can I add one little question? Because, I mean, you mentioned Rio Tinto. They might not be world champions in ethical attitudes, really. But, I mean, do you experience a difference from, international multi-conglomerates and institutions or endeavors that are financed by the strong native funds in North America? I mean, go they easier on the nature, and are they willing to go closer to fulfill sustainable requirements?
Absolutely. Like I said, in the history, they weren't. I mean, It was totally different. But now every mining company that I know of are looking at the ESGs. They're looking at how they give back.
Yeah.
They're more ethical in their delivery. And they're more looking at how they work with people. So diamonds are gone in the Northwest Territories. It's a declining market. Artificial diamonds are more popular now. But what we found, and we were worried, we were really worried, because the majority of our GDP is based on mining, and that's not going to go away. People say we need to diversify, we do, but we can't sell mucklucks and parkas and support our economy. Arts is great, but mining is our major economy.
So, Hugh, I'm going to make good on my promise or threat, depending on the way you look at it. But I mean, we just listened to Vivian Motzfeldt to talk about what I define as a revolution in Greenland. I mean, it is amazing to see how this nation of 7,000 people are now tackling the greatest infrastructure investment in their history by building 3 international airports, and it will revolutionize tourism in Greenland far beyond what the Greenlanders think today. She mentioned hotels, etc., but one of the things that is needed, I think, in countries like Greenland to fulfill what they want to get out of this are hotels of all classifications, from boutique hotels to smaller, less quality accommodations, for example, for my daughters who like to go cheaply to Greenland, if that is at all possible. So my question, Hugh, is your company that has invested in hotels in Iceland and probably in Alaska, are you going into Greenland, investing there, and is that a feasible and attractive option for you?
Well, let me start sort of at a higher level. You're a tough questioner. I think there's 2 things.
But you're not going to escape from this.
I'm not going to escape from it, but I will get to it. There's 2 things I believe completely necessary for the Arctic Investment Partnership to be successful. There is the ingredient of someone like Scott Minerd, who has agreed to go out, do the roadshow, raise, keyword, permanent capital, right? Traditionally, there's been private equity funds that are short-lived life, and then people need to sell, and then people need to go. And what he's referencing is a distinctive word, because that permanent capital then can have permanent partners in the locations it invests.
Okay.
And that's a key point. So the cross-Arctic investment is critically important. I'm proud to say that in June of 2022, a very prominent Icelandic company, Arctic Adventures, partnered with PT Capital and made a very substantial investment in Alaska tourism. Mm-hmm. That's, I think, the first time, maybe, that an Icelandic company comes to Alaska. Now, I've been coming to Alaska, from Alaska to Iceland for a decade now. I've probably lost 5 years of my life on jet lag. So it is kind of nice when they're in the office last week and they're drinking coffee and I feel just great. So it's the cross-Arctic expertise that I believe is critical. And for Greenland specifically, in the tourism space, and I was just in your country a month ago, and what I realized is what's going to be necessary for our Arctic Investment Partnership is to work closely with the government, to do it on your terms, to make sure that it's an appropriate use of capital, and to build the relationships so that those relationships are there. Secondly, that we need a team on the ground, a team of folks who can help develop these projects. Because to develop in Greenland, and I've learned this, it's not a slow process. It is going to be some work. But I will say in 2032, the headline, I think, is going to be Greenland has record tourism season, sustainable tourism built there. And if you look at what happened in Alaska in the 90s, we went from something like 200,000 tourists to 2.4 million. Iceland from 2010 went up to 2.2 million in 2019. You look at these numbers, that's not the way Greenland wants to do it. They want to do it in a way that's going to be appropriate for the folks that live there. And I am excited to, one, have you as a partner to go out and get this permanent capital, two, to go to Greenland to build out a team with their local expertise, and then three, start down this path, because it's probably the biggest opportunity from an investment standpoint that sits in the Arctic today. When someone in, Charlotte, North Carolina can go with their family of three and affordably fly to Nuuk and take their family on a vacation and have a good time, right now it's not accessible for most people because it's very expensive. So that opportunity is going to be a game changer with the airports.
Well, I have nothing against Nuuk, but, I would rather take my family to Ilulissat. That is one of a kind in the world. Scott, you wanted to say?
Yes,
something?
he didn't answer your question.
Well, okay.
That's a good
So,
question.
Scott,
I got out of it. I
Scott,
talked long enough that he forgot
He
what
should
he
go
asked.
into politics. You know?
Scott, he is a typical politician. He's not a down-to-earth person like I am. But anyway, he didn't really answer my question, but I'm going to ask you to answer my question. You are the capital aggregator, and you talk quite wisely. I mean, you know that world, but you talk about national sovereign wealth funds in countries far away. Maybe 6 months ago, I would have said that you and President Grimsson are really high up in the skies when you're talking about this. But now we have a hotel 200 meters from here that actually today is owned by one of these funds. So as I understand you, you want to aggregate capital on a large scale from these funds, and then you want to distribute it from that vehicle to smaller projects, and that is why, I am right in that, isn't it? That is why even small-scale projects, like in Greenland, like in Iceland, they could gain from this. And one of the good things about the sovereign wealth fund is that they have a very patient capital, isn't it?
That's right, very patient and understanding. And I want to say one thing, because if Hugh's not going to answer your question, I'll answer it for him, which is literally when we were standing here to come on stage, we were talking about a possible hotel investment in Nuuk. Yes. So he doesn't want to get,
Well, I mean, this must be a very enjoyable tidings for the people from Greenland that are here. Here you have two very strong financiers, and they have made a promise. Don't forget that. But I mean, what in the Northwest Territories, what type of investments are you seeking? I mean, do you have a rising tourism like we have in some other parts of the Arctic?
Well, we're really tight. Like I said, we work closely with indigenous governments now. We have what's called the Mackenzie Valley Resource Management Act, which is defined by indigenous governments and our public government. It's a little bit more cumbersome, I would say, but you can either do the work up front. The indigenous governments work closely with us on our acts, our policies, the ESGs, all that stuff. If you invest in us, it's a little bit more cumbersome at the front, but at the back end, you don't have people tying themselves to trees and blocking roads because the indigenous governments are already in there. Like I say, we have mining for diamonds is gone, but we have 23 of the listed 31 critical minerals that by Canada is listed for the green economy. We're rich underneath us, but we're very small in the territories. We're only 44,000 people, so we don't personally have the money to invest. We need partnerships. But what we have to offer is critical to the world. If we want to make sure that this world is sustainable for our future generations, then
but there's also a trade. There's also a long-standing traditional trait in your culture, which I can already describe as it's the sharing tradition. So I ask you, as the premier, the foremost politician there, how are you going to ensure that those that come with loads of capital and create a lot of wealth leave a justifiable amount of the wealth for your people?
because you don't come in. You don't get an agreement unless you've already defined that before.
Okay. I mean, I think we've come to a very concrete conclusion, which is rare in a panel discussion like this. I mean, they have described how we have already in place a protocol, an ethical protocol, that is really the basis for investment. We also have come to the conclusion, or these people, these two guys that are involved in the practicalities, that now is the time to make an attempt to formalize a financial vehicle and start accumulating funds to be able to invest in the Arctic areas. So this assembly is the one in the world that is characterized by real democratic traditions. So now, my beloved audience, you have a chance to ask some questions of these people. So let's exercise democracy while it exists. Over there. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Kristín Vala Ragnarsdóttir from the University of Iceland. I'm wondering why I haven't heard from either from you or from the Greenland government representative here that you would like to be a member of EITI, which is the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, run out of Norway, which actually protects the local people by making all contracts transparent and open, so that the big funders or people with the big money do not run away with all the profits, and also, do things in an ethical and environmentally friendly manners.
Madam Premier, would you like to answer that? Or?
That's not part of that, so I think.
I don't know this standard or this organization. What I can say is I grew up in a small Arctic community in Bethel, Alaska, and when you live in a small place, I think you also want to be very protective of foreign standards being put on you, because oftentimes not everything fits in the box that you live in. And so I don't know your standard, but as a person that lives in the Arctic, I think there's two things it takes. It takes trust and building bridges, and it takes listening to the local community and not trying to impose, but trying to work with them for what's appropriate for where they live.
But I think, Kristín...
I'm sorry.
I want to say, the first off, have they embraced the Arctic Investment Protocol? Are they signatories to that?
Well,
okay. Okay. Well, that would be important. That would be important. But secondly, to be practical, I think we should. Afterwards, we'll speak. I would like to get more educated with you.
Yeah. So I mean, Kristín, these people would like to get more educated. So I will be the King Solomon in this issue. So I invite you to come to the next assembly with a breakout session to introduce this area. Thank you. Over there.
Mead's asking a question.
Mead, really?
So
come on, Mead.
The question I want to ask the panel is, Scott, you wrote an article now 10 years ago about the Arctic as an emerging market. How would you describe the Arctic today? And I'd love to hear the Premier and Hugh's view on that as well. But are we a good place to put capital, and why?
Well, you remember Governor Treadwell, that when I wrote that, I also talked about the fact that the Arctic is unique, and that of the 8 Arctic nations, 7 are governed by the rule of law. And so therefore, the interesting thing about the Arctic is that emerging markets are known for having outsized returns, but there's always the risk you have around the political stability in emerging markets. The Arctic and the investment opportunity in the Arctic offers the same kind of returns as an emerging market, but without the risk of the political risk. And so that was the comparison I made at the time, and I think today it's probably more true than it was, because I think the work that we all did, and Governor Treadwell was one of the participants in the Arctic Investment Protocol, helping to develop it, that groundwork and the work Hugh's done have really helped us move to a new level that we wouldn't have been at when I wrote that article 10 years ago.
I would just add to that the Arctic isn't monolithic. Like, people speak of the Arctic like the Arctic's Hawaii. I don't know. Like it's a place. The Arctic is diverse, and there's pockets of great wealth and great opportunity. The financial markets in Iceland are quite sophisticated. And then there's pockets that I would classify as really more emerging market, and it's going to be harder, and it's going to take longer, and the capital is going to have to be more patient. And what AIP is what we're announcing today is PT Capital, Guggenheim, and Ariane Banki are forming AIP. From this point on, we're going to reach out to stakeholders who are interested in providing input into this strategy. That strategy will go into the document that forms our fund, and that fund will be the vehicle to hopefully hit the sophisticated parts of the Arctic where it's necessary, but also where the developments such as hotels in Greenland, such as other Northwest Territories. And I think it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of boots on the ground, and certainly my team's going to have to grow a little bit to tackle this.
Okay. Yeah. Madam Premier also wants to add her views on this.
Yep, I would think that the Arctic is a great place to invest in honesty. I think that before the Arctic was more inaccessible, it was harder to get there, very expensive for investors, but the sea is opening, the ice is melting, and that's a bad thing for climate change. It's a bad thing for the economy, but it's a good thing for investors because now it's going to be more accessible. You'll be able to have ports, you'll be able to travel, you'll be able to come in, and so it'll be cheaper for investors. And like I said, the Arctic has a lot to offer in the Northwest Territories and all of Canada's 3 territories. We have huge critical minerals. There's wealth there, there's gold, and it can benefit everyone. With the standards that we have, the processes that we have now, it's not just about extracting money. It's the people will win, the communities will win, and the investors will win. It's win for everyone.
Okay, with these wise words, I draw the session to a close. I thank you for being a very well-behaved audience, and I thank you, the panelists, for being extremely orderly and clever in your utterances. And I have to say, I think a lot of you will look back on this session as a historic session, because what has been said here really is a watershed in the history of Arctic investment. And thank you all.
Thank you.